Hi, there are two ways of configuring APISIX. One is using admin API, another is declarative configuration in YAML file. But sometimes as your configurations increase, it increases the complexity, and managing these configuration files like a YAML or admin APIs becomes more challenging. To make things easier, we developed APISIX Declarative CLI, or in short ADC. It is a tool that lets you define your APISIX configurations declaratively. My name is Babur. In this video, we'll look at how you can manage your APISIX configurations with ADC. With APISIX Declarative CLI, you can validate existing APISIX configuration files and sync with running APISIX instance. Also, you can compare local and running configuration files to find out the differences, what is removed, what is added, or what has been updated. And also you can easily convert your open API definitions to APISIX configuration without creating them manually. Let's see how the APISIX ADC tool works. Before get started using APISIX Declarative CLI, make sure that you have Docker installed on your machine. In my case, I am using Windows operating system. As you can see, Docker desktop installed. And then we'll run APISIX instance to interact with the configuration. You can easily install APISIX using a quick start script, and once the APISIX installed, you will get some sort of successful response like APISIX is ready. Next, we install the ADC. There are two ways of installing ADC using Go. In this case, you must have a Go installed on your machine. If you don't have a Go installed, you can also download the latest ADC binary for your operating system. Since I am using a Linux WSDL for Windows operating system, I can first download the package and also extract from the zip file all necessary things. As you can see, I have the ADC package in here, and then next I need to add to this ADC package to the bin folder. I will do this, of course, using sudo and provide some password and click on next. Now I have moved the ADC to the bin folder. You can find the other binaries for other operating systems on a release page. In the future, these binaries will be published on the package managers like maybe Homebrew, and to check if ADC installed and run. And now to check if ADC is installed, we can simply run ADC's help command. As you can see, if it's installed successfully, you should be able to see all the available subcommands and how to use them. Now we have both APISIX and ADC installed. To configure ADC to work with our deployed APISIX instance, we can simply run ADC configure. And if everything is correct, you should see the message something successful. In our case, ADC is configured, as you can see, and we can use another ping subcommand to check the connectivity with APISIX anytime. Let's test it, and here we go. Our ADC tool is connected to APISIX successfully. Now I can already begin with writing APISIX configuration file, and we can test to validate this APISIX configuration file using ADC tool. As you can see, I have created under my APISIX folder config.yaml file that has some services like upstream service and the route, which means this route forwards all the traffic to the upstream service. Very common configuration example for APISIX. And since our ADC already connected to our APISIX instance, we can use it now to validate the configuration before we actually apply for the running instance. To validate this, I can navigate to the config file where it's located. It was under APISIX folder, and I will run ADC validate config.yaml. If I click on that, if everything is okay and configuration is valid, you will get something like the response by saying the configuration file successfully validated. Also, we can test some sort of failure if our ADC tool can identify some errors. For example, I can try to remove port attribute from the upstream configuration, and let's test once again how the ADC tool reacts on this error change. If I rerun again the same command, as you can see, it is showing some sort of error message. That's as we expected, right? And which means upstream validation failed because it's expecting nodes with also the host object. Now let's put it back, the configuration, and we tested APISIX ADC is working fine. And next step, now I can sync this configuration using ADC to the connected APISIX instance. So I will jump back to terminal and run ADC sync config.yaml file. If I do that, as you can see, it creates first the service and route, and under the hood everything is set up automatically. And to verify if this route is created and it's working properly, we can try to send now a request against the route we created, I mean the route endpoint. If you do that, if everything is correct, you will receive actually response back from your upstream service. This is here how the magic works. With a single command line, we created the route and upstream, and our first routing mechanism is working. With ADC tool, it's also possible to compare two different versions of APISIX configuration file. Let's assume that this config was the first version, and we can now update our configuration in a config.yaml file by adding let's say another route. I can just remove that, add here additional route, and to check if this APISIX configuration file detects any changes. With ADC tool, you can also find the differences between previous version and the current version of your APISIX configuration file using ADC diff command. If you do that, as you can see, it clearly shows everything what is added and what is updated and what is deleted. As you can see, we removed some configuration from upstream, and we also deleted additional route, which means we actually added or deleted from the previous version. It allows us to understand what exactly changed before applying this configuration to running instance. Yet another fancy feature of APISIX Declarative CLI, it has a basic support for working with OpenAPI definitions. ADC lets you convert definitions in OpenAPI format to APISIX configuration. As you can see, I have OpenAPI.yaml file, and you can use a single command to convert this OpenAPI spec to APISIX configuration, such as creating routes, initializing some sort of upstreams. Let's try that. Assuming that I have this YAML file, and I can jump back on my terminal and try to run another ADC sub command, call it OpenAPI to APISIX, and we are trying to generate new config.yaml file using OpenAPI.yaml. If you click on that, you get a response. Okay, conversion was successful. Let's test if our existing config YAML file has been updated. Here we go. Actually, this config file is created from the OpenAPI spec. But still, there are some issues. It is incomplete. We are still need to do a lot of configuration manually, and we are nowadays improving this ADC tool to bridge this gap between the OpenAPI definitions and what can be directly mapped to the APISIX configuration. To learn more about other features of ADC, you can do ADC /help, and you can see other subcommands and get more information about each command by running the possible commands. As we discovered, the ADC tool still needs some improvements and being continuously added new cool features. If you're interested, you can just learn more about the project on this GitHub repository. Feel free to report the bugs or propose some new features, and we are open to all sorts of contributions. Thank you for watching. If you want to learn more about APISIX, and please subscribe to our channel, click on the bell to receive notifications about new videos.